Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming out today on a beautiful Minnesota day, National Signing Day. And without further ado, I'll just introduce head coach Glenn Caruso.
Thank you. Short intro, but absolutely appropriate. Thank you for coming out. You know, as we look, we have a lot of people who are joining us too online, and I appreciate you guys being with us. I think today is kind of a culmination of a lot of things, but one of those, just in how we're bringing this to the constituents of St. Thomas, is part and parcel of kind of our entrepreneurial spirit, in that 3 years ago, before COVID, we probably never would have thought that when we had a blizzard, you'd still be able to cover St. Thomas. So thank you for being with us as well. But exciting day today for a lot of reasons. And as I look around the room, it's always about people. It's always people. And there's a lot of things that have had to go into process and come to fruition in order for a day like today to happen. And as I look around the room and see a mosaic of so many different people who have helped make that happen. Certainly there's players and coaches who are here, but everybody from administrators to alumni to student involvement, and just so happy and proud that you're able to spend some time with us. So what I thought we'd do today, to be as thrifty as we possibly can, is I will make a general statement. I'll talk to you about the class. I'll go through the class. There's 29 young men who are our newest future alums, I guess, if you'd like to say it that way. That's the way I like to say it. And these 29 men come from all over the country. And although we're not going to show film of each one, I will stick around later, because if any of the media outlets does want to go through any of the film or have specific questions, we certainly will. I'll open it up for questions, whether those questions are coming online or through the cameras and the people who are in the room, and we'll answer that after I do show the class a little bit in terms of slides. But the class, very similar in some ways to last year's class. I mean, I think perspective matters, and I think to frame where we are matters. We have officially been in Division I all of like 17 and a half months. We're not even at our year and a half mark yet, right? And because recruiting certainly works way ahead, this is the way we see it, our third class in Division I, if you want to look at it that way. A lot of similarities. Similarities would be heavy in terms of numbers from Minnesota. 12 of the 29 young men who we're bringing into this program are from the state of Minnesota, but also reaches coast to coast and border to border, and 10 different states are represented. So I would be completely remiss. You're gonna ooh and ah when you watch some of the film, or when you see some of the statistics, or maybe when we talk about some of these young men, and none of it would be able to be done unless it was for our coaching staff. And our coaching staff works tirelessly. This isn't like you go out and you watch a game and you pick that kid, and then all of a sudden you say, hey, you want to come to my school, and it just happens. This is a year-long process of very, very diligent evaluation, thoughtfulness, collaboration, which I will say is something that we're blessed to be here. That we're going on year 16 now. I always mark the end of the season and the beginning of the recruiting classes, the beginning of the next year. We just finished 15, we're heading on 16. And to be able to have a staff that is thoughtful enough to be able to see the bigger picture and how those young men fit into the class is not only something we're grateful for, but it's also refreshing, because a lot of times I've been on staffs before, and I've seen staffs before, where there's a lot of posturing for players that they might have recruited. And to be able to have a staff led by these guys, some of which we've been together 15, 16, 20 years, I think speaks to the type of young man that we bring in. So thank you for those coaches who do all the work, and then let me get up here with my little sweater vest on and talk about the class. So you guys are absolute heroes in my mind. When we go into the class, when we go into trying to find out how this class fits, there's always going to be some core principles, some beliefs of numbers of where we need to be. But as we grow, and last year, 2 years ago, we're sitting up here last year after a 7-3 record, and things changed this year. Fortunately for the University of St. Thomas, they changed for the better. We ended up 10-1. And as things change and as the earth shifts, bless you, beneath us, it's important that our recruiting is as fluid as that too. And so even though it is done way ahead of time, a lot of the finishing touches have been done in a totally different world than what we were recruiting in a year ago or even 2 years ago. So a few things by the numbers. I don't know if there's anybody who needs me to step back to the mic, just holler at me, but I'd rather walk around a little bit. By location, 29 young men in the class. We are going to reserve 1 or 2 more spots for the second signing. That's a thoughtful way of what we intend to do. But we just about nailed it. We were expecting 28 to 29 in the class. 12 are from Minnesota, 5 are from Wisconsin, 3 from Illinois, 2 from Maryland and Nebraska. Maryland might seem like a totally new place, but we've had a couple of guys that we had success in from Maryland. Nebraska, as close as it is, was relatively brand new to us until just a couple of years ago. And then 1 student athlete from Georgia, Michigan, North Dakota, Washington, and Texas. So again, a heavy upper Midwest population in terms of the numbers, and in my opinion, a really nice reach and stretch in terms of being able to attract guys from all over the country. By academics, now this is where the class most resembles last year's class. Heights and weights a little different, 40 times reach, a little different if you want to put it on a type, I appreciate it. But for the most part, it ends up being the academics that is very, very, very similar. So the 29 young men, we have a 3.77 GPA that is down. Last year we were 3.78, all right, so we're down by 100. And we have 11 guys in the class in high school with a 3.9 and better. These end up being the top. Now, as you would imagine, some of these guys have not fully selected what their majors are going to be. I think that's one of the blessings of being able to be at a liberal arts school, is that you can attract a young man who doesn't know, or a young woman who doesn't yet know what he or she might want to go into. But for the most part, of the guys who have declared, business and engineering and pre-med are at the top of the list. Again, those 3 are very similar to last year. They're the same exact 3 as last year's class. And real estate, computer science, education, and then undecided after that. By position, there's not always going to be a complete split of a class between offense and defense, at least not intentionally. You want to fill gaps, you want to fill holes or graduation. And but it's fairly close. 5 on the offensive line, 2 tight ends, 3 wide receivers, a running back, a quarterback, an athlete. What's an athlete? They're all athletes. I'm not insinuating that you're not an athlete, but an athlete is a guy who we haven't placed yet. Could play a wide receiver spot, could play a running back spot, a defensive back spot, special teams, something like that. On the defensive side, we were pretty fortunate to be heavy and retain some fifth-year seniors at the defensive line spot. So we only took 1, still holding out room for 1 more at the defensive line. Inside linebackers 3, outside linebackers 3, 5 defensive backs, and a kicker, punter that we'll talk about here. A few interesting notes. I know a lot of you guys go to a lot of these throughout the year, maybe several throughout the day. And here's a couple things that I think have in the past made St. Thomas a little bit different or unique. And I think it stands out a little bit. 21 of our young men, 21 to 29, are multi-sport athletes. So if for some reason there is a young man who is watching at home who's 8 years old and thinking of specializing in a sport, I'm just going to tell you, it makes very little sense to do so. To have multi-sport athletes is part of what we've always done here. And it allows our guys to compete year-round. You just got done watching an entire fall of football where our guys competed for all 60 minutes of every one of those games. Some ended up in our favor, some did not. But the way that happens is not by walking into practice and saying compete. It's by taking competitive people, competitive in all they do, in the classroom, at home, competitive in football. And the multi-sport guys typically are of that ilk. 7 of these guys were high school quarterbacks. There have been years where when our classes used to be bigger a decade ago, there were years where this number was approaching 15 or 16. But in high school, a lot of these guys, even though we're only going to take 2 in the class, they're going to play quarterback for the University of St. Thomas. 7 that played high school quarterback. This, I think, is neat. There's 6 state champions this year in this class. And that definitely, it's not a prerequisite. There's great players all over the place that don't win state championships. Let me be really clear, and that's our job to find them. But that's a pretty high percentage when you talk about 20% of your class, 23, 22% of your class having just finished their fall as a state champion in 4 different states. I think that's pretty neat. And another one, and this is something that as we grow into Division I, and we're in the midst of it right now, our prospect camps are only, coaches, are they 2 years old? Or are we going on year 3? We're going on year 3, so we have not had prospect camps until a couple of years ago. And they went from, just like everything else that we do, humble beginnings of our first camp speed at 75 or 100. Last year, we were able to bring 800 young men, student athletes, to the campus over the summer, where they were able to see the University of St. Thomas, walk around, feel what St. Thomas feels like. And I think that paid a lot of dividends for us, but 19 of these 29 were in camp. And look, we're going to make mistakes. I'm not going to say plenty of mistakes. Hopefully, if we do our job, it's not plenty of mistakes. But we're going to make mistakes in recruiting. But one of the mistakes that if you can avert, you'd like to, is your person-to-person evaluation. And in a day and an age all the more devoted to style over substance, or GIFs or short videos or something where there's just a little snippet, when you have an opportunity as a coaching staff to be able to sit down and look a young man in the eye and talk to him, that matters. When you have a chance to be able to go out on the field and coach him and see how he responds to you, that matters. So although we'll always make mistakes, we'll never be perfect, hopefully having people on campus is one of those things that eliminate some of that risk that we take on. A few more things. The furthest is from 1,738 miles away from the great state of Washington. And the second is the most closest, is from 7 miles away up the street in Roseville. The biggest town is Chicago, 2.71 million, so from the biggest city of one of our recruits. And the smallest one, does anybody remember the size of last year's smallest town? Does anybody? Mark, no? No, it was 476, and we actually took 2 out of that town, so it went down to 474 last year. That was Truro, Iowa, right? Smallest town is actually Mayer, Minnesota, 2,552. So if you think about, and this is just trying to give you as broad perspective as we possibly can, literally, and I don't use that term lightly, the only conference to go border to border and coast to coast in the country. Like, that's an absolute blessing. The only one of the 26 conferences that are like that, and certainly football and the way football is played provides you with the opportunity to do that. This is our conference map. So if you look at where our young men are from, this should give you a pretty good indicator. It actually flows pretty sequentially from where our conference map is. So as you think about Dr. Phil Estin and President Rob Vischer and their expansion of how this school is going to grow, football is able to provide a picture of what some of that growth might look like. So our class this year, again, goes border to border from the Dakotas down to Texas and coast to coast. And I think that's appropriate because of the league we're playing in, and also because of the amount of schools that we can now have a chance at a young man. Doesn't mean we didn't recruit Texas or California or Washington before. We did. But the opportunity to yield said young man changes now with the way the school has decided to move in the direction it has. So very great. I'm going to go by position. And like I said, I'm not going to show film, but I will talk about each one, maybe for 45 seconds or so. So this should take about 20 minutes, and then I'll open it up for questions at the end. We always start with the offensive line. As long as I'm standing here in my little sweater vest at this podium, it's always going to start with the offensive line. It's just the way it is. And if you look at some of the success on both sides of the ball that I think we have, I think it emanates out from the offensive line. 4 of the 5 are from the state of Minnesota. Dakota Egger, a bit of a project in terms of he's just growing into his body now. Had him in camp, 6'5", 242 pounds, 242 in camp, and already has done a tremendous job in the last 6 months since. And we will play him probably at the left tackle spot, it could be the right tackle spot. Marcus Johnson comes out of Mayer Lutheran High School, about an hour west of here. That's the small town, 2,552. Maybe the most polished so far of the offensive line young men who are coming in. 6'5", 305 pounds, and a multi-sport kid as well. Jeff Keller. Jeff is Bloomington Kennedy has had a beautiful resurgence in the last couple of years, and I think it's because of the types of young men that are leading that program. That's something we always look for. And he's one of those young men, you could tell when he was at camp and how he carried himself, that he's a leader with ridiculously high expectations. Fits in well to the University of St. Thomas football program, no doubt. Caleb Rector. So Caleb, Chaska High School, can play a couple different positions for us, probably interior, but center and guard. And that's so important. We just got done, just before I walked in here, I was talking with Matt Wyman. Matt Wyman, we played 14 seasons here since we first got here. 9 of those 14 seasons, we've had the All-American center. That's pretty awesome, right? So that's pretty great. But not always does that center play center right away. A lot of times he is moved into that from a tackle or a guard spot. Caleb can play either guard, certainly on the center spot. And Max Ross from Washington, more of a shorter, thicker guy who would also play the inside as well. Tight ends, we took 2 this year. You know we like to play with as many as we possibly can. If you watched us play, you know that. If we could play with 5, we would, but we'll play with as many as we possibly can and populate that position group as strongly as we can. Brad Pickerel was a young man from Nebraska who came up to camp. Frankly, we didn't know a whole lot about him before he came up. He's probably going to most likely play the traditional, what we would call the Y spot. And from Scott Catholic, which, by the way, I have to mention this, we've recruited Omaha a long, long time. And in a decade and a half, this is our first young man from Scott. We've been able to crack into Creighton Prep and some of the other ones down there, but I think Brady and the other coaches did a great job making sure that we were able to get him to campus from Scott. St. Joseph's Catholic down in southern Wisconsin is where Luke Schuler comes from. Luke is a little bit more like our other tight end, the one that we would play in various positions. And he also was in camp and wowed us pretty quickly from Kenosha. Wide receivers, you're going to see 3, but that athlete we talked about before is, I'll talk to him about him a little bit, but he also can play receiver. Owen Lyons from Brother Rice down in Chicago. Chicago has always been wonderful. That's where one of my grandparents went to high school down there. And since we've moved in, when we got here, there was 1 young man on the team from Chicago. And since then, we've had 38 of them graduate out through the program. And as we've grown, it started on the North Metro and grown through to the South Side. Brother Rice is the South Side. Joey Fitzgerald, a couple other guys might be names that you know if you follow closely. And he's playing wide receiver, bigger, stronger kid. If you've watched this last year, you know that although we will have smaller kids maybe in the slot, the size and what Coach Dotson and Coach Landry can do with that size on the edge is a big difference maker from where we are now compared to where we were maybe 5 or 10 years ago. Jason Lindsay. Jason was one of our very first commits. He might have been, was he the first commit? The first commit. Coach Watkins does an amazing job going back home. And I know Jamal Griffin sees the state pop up and he smiles really big because that's his home as well. But to be able to go out and find the right kids at the right places, he was out of camp and we've known about him a long time. But Jason Lindsay will play that interior wide receiver spot. And then Stefano Giovanelli, my favorite name in the class, just in case anyone was wondering. You know I like the double consonants and then the vowel, right? But Stefano's dad is one of our professors here at the University of St. Thomas, so we've known about him for quite some time. Sharp young man. What I love about Stefano was he is a wide receiver. And we offered and committed within the hour. And his team, even though he knew he was going off to play wide receiver in college, his team needed a quarterback. And so through the end of the season and the playoff run, he actually played 6 games of quarterback, which is pretty cool. We always love that. Running backs, we took 3 running backs. All are a little bit different. You can say tailback, fullback, I think as our offense evolves, there's probably less disparity between what the tailback and the fullback looks like because we're able to get strong athletes. Now, some are 6'1", like Sean Shipman, some are 5'8", like Hope DeBio, right? But they're all very, very strong, twitchy, powerful, that has a nice combination. And so all 3 will be able to play either one of the spots. But Denzel Gibson, coached by someone who has been very close to us for 25 years, down at IC Catholic in Elmhurst, just outside of Chicago. And they built the program the last 10 years on these types of kids, guys who are culture builders and tough football players. And when they won the state championship, the second one this past year. So we'll play Denzel on tailback. Daniel Harper. Daniel is another one who, Calvert Hall, so Coach Watkins went to out east to grab him in Maryland. But Daniel was a guy who came out here on his own and started to look at the school a little bit. I don't think you can underestimate how important it is when a young man can walk around campus. Hopefully it's not on a day where you have a foot and a half of snow. But to walk around campus and be able to feel what St. Thomas feels like and see what St. Thomas is close up, I believe in my heart of hearts, that's one of the reasons that we got Daniel Harper. And C.J. Johnson. C.J. Johnson is out of Waukesha, southern Wisconsin. Big kid. Now, this is an interesting year that he had. It was a fairly rough year for his team. They needed him. Coach, what positions did he play?
Left tackle, safety, linebacker, DN, D tackle, offensive line, fullback, tight end.
Straight up. The kid did just about everything, including he had 2 jerseys on the sideline because you can't wear number 22 when you go play right tackle or left tackle or whatever it is. So he would have to go to the sideline and change jerseys. Very, very explosive in small spaces. I think as you look at some of our playmakers, whether it be along the midline, running back, a fullback, an inside linebacker, or safety, a lot of those guys might not be as tall as CJ, but they're very explosive in small spaces, and CJ can do it all. He'll play that combo spot. You know, we just lost Josh Comas to graduation, and he'll leave a huge void, so he's one of the guys that'll be playing that spot. Quarterback, we took 2 this year, and Michael Rosberg is probably one of the more, I would say, decorated is not necessarily something that is the most important thing to us in recruiting, but Michael Rosberg, well, known about Michael for a long time. Fargo Shanley, we have yet to have a player out of Fargo Shanley. Last year, 2 years ago, we got our first player from Fargo North. And as you know, Rachel and I started our family there, spent a lot of time up in Fargo and got to know those coaches and that football up there really well. Well, Shanley, which is the only Catholic school in Fargo, there's a couple others in the state, Shanley made the decision to move up. Tell me you don't love this story. So they had a ton of success in the small division, right? A lot of people were looking at them cross-eyed because they had a lot of success. They elected to go into the big school division, and that was 4 years ago. And in 4 years, they went from just barely making the playoffs and fighting there to winning the state championship in the largest class in North Dakota. And I think that speaks volumes to a young man who would take on something like that. Just like we're talking, these quarterbacks can pretty much go to a lot of different places if they so choose, right? But I think it speaks a lot to Michael. Michael was the North Dakota Player of the Year. I think Coach Landry did an unbelievable job identifying him, recruiting him. We got him down to campus for a camp. We were able to coach him. He actually came down 2 different times from Fargo for a junior day in a camp. Big kid. I don't know what he went into his junior year weighing, but it was probably somewhere in the vicinity of 180, 185 pounds, and has really blossomed. So they won their state championship this year. He set the all-time North Dakota passing record, and so he far surpassed Coach Landry's record. Coach is on that list somewhere, but I don't think he's in the top 3. But he surpassed all of them, and just grateful that we can have a guy like Michael, not just a physical leader, not just a 4.0 student, but a culture builder, a guy who understands what the importance is of what we do in the locker room, in our department, and on our university's campus. Pretty cool. And Tactioca, Tac is actually high school classmates. We only have 2 of these in this class, with C.J. Johnson. So he went through the same tumultuous season that we talked about. But fortunately, this is a young man who had we not had him up over the summer, I don't know if necessarily he would be on this slideshow right now. Coach loved him, put him in a multiple athlete category, can do a lot of different things, 6'3", 195, plays bigger than 195, I know that's pretty darn big, and really blessed to have Zach. The athlete category, so this is, if anybody knows the name Waldvogel, right, this is what I would say the player who is most Waldvogel-esque. Only people who are on the inside would understand that, but Eli Paulson, who's from Anoka, just set the all-time record for single-season receptions in the history of Minnesota football. That's pretty cool. And they've been throwing the ball around here pretty well for the last 10 to 12 years, I would say. And Bo Wazrick, who just does an amazing job, says, Coach, I'm just telling you, he might not look like some of your guys that you have out in the wide receiver spot, but he's the most competitive guy that we have. And I think Coach was right, because in all of our years, I would put him in maybe one of the top 10 to 12 most competitive kids we've ever recruited, not got, recruited in the last 15 years. He's also a wrestler, Greco-Roman wrestler, very, very successful. His father was Olympian silver medalist for us. and grateful that he has that kind of background. But locked in, came in late because he had an unbelievable senior year, and I think really speaks to the power of what St. Thomas is. Because I think that gave us maybe an in where a lot of other schools that don't have that type of notoriety or recognition or institutional knowledge of people know what the school is, they got our foot in the door. And we're going to play him at wide receiver, but you're going to see him in the backfield. You might even see him in the defensive backfield. He's definitely going to be returning kicks. He's going to do a lot of different things. On the defensive side, like I said, we went low in numbers on the defensive line, trying to save one spot. But Blake Oshtar is a guy who came to us Notre Dame Academy, which is out of Green Bay. For some of you folks in the room, you would remember it as Premantra. It's a school that consolidated. I see a couple of nods over there. But a school that has treated St. Thomas very well. We've had 12 players from this school alone. And they seem, the guys like Benny Pelini and Kevin Metzler, these are names that have really added tremendous value, not just to our program, but to our school. And he's growing like a weed right now. And he's just a young kid who's growing. And Coach Grable will do a great job with him. Linebackers, we split them up. So Caleb Sandstrom, he's one of those state champions as well. Elk River's done an amazing job the last decade or so. Really amazing job. If you haven't watched them play, it's kind of fun to if you like throwback football. They play with 2 tight ends and 3 backs in the backfield. It's a straight T. You think you're watching Vince Lombardi's Packers or something like that. And they play defense exactly the way that you should when your offense is 2 tight ends with 3 backs in the backfield. Very physical. Caleb Sandstrom's comp would be Johnny Bunce, a taller, broader, longer. Do we think water? Anybody ever water, sweetheart? Can you grab some of your water? That's my wife. I asked sweetheart. Just for the record. Thank you. Appreciate it. So a lot like Johnny, he's a tough matchup where he's big and strong to come off the edge and be able to kind of hunker down in there. But he's also very athletic and can turn a short corner. We're going to play him outside, even though he played inside for his high school. Went and watched the state championship game, and the kid ends up with like 21, 22 tackles in the state championship. Part of that 21, 22 tackles. Really, really impressive, but happy to have Caleb. Connor Scheisel. Connor's out of Kimberly High School, another school that, if you paid attention to Wisconsin football the last 15 years, they have graduated up to the biggest class, and they have accelerated tremendously. And it's their entire athletic department. Our athletic department has a handful of folks already, not in football, but in other sports, from Kimberly High School already. So I think that is a part of maybe what allowed him to understand, oh, I know someone who went to this school, came to camp, we loved him, we're going to play him at the outside linebacker spot. Cranked up to have him. Cole Snead, we just got off a Zoom with him this morning. You know, you sit in your little war room and you drink your coffee and you're on your social media while signing day happens. It's kind of a fun ritual, to be honest with you. It's a pretty fun day. And, you know, the kids, they Zoom in or they FaceTime in. And we had done a couple of these, and all of a sudden his face pops up on the screen with a smile that the screen couldn't even capture. And it was just fun to see. It really was. But Cole is a really, really neat matchup. OPRF, for those folks that know, city and suburban high school down in Chicago. OPRF's been a power in football, basketball, wrestling, baseball, track for years. 6'3", 215, and just starting to grow right now. Nash Tichy right down the road at Orono High School, another school that's been very good to us. If you look back and you look at guys like Shea Albrecht that were able to come in, polished, and play right away. And Nash is a linebacker that's very much in that same vein. Coach does a great job with the culture and the attitude and understanding that confidence can come with tremendous humility and balancing those two. Coach does a great job, and the players that he sends to us are very, very similar, and that's exactly what Nash is. Danny Cheetah, physical. So these inside linebackers, tremendously physical. But this was the closest that we had, 7 miles right up the road in Danny Cheetah. No relation to the Cheetahs that you would commonly think of when you think of St. Thomas necessarily, although you know that the Cheetah is a very, very prominent name, specifically up Rice Street, and as you get into Roseville, there's a lot, and the family's been around for a long time. And if you look at him, he doesn't jump off the page at you. And when you talk to him, he's very demure, he's very humble, And when you flip on the film and the lights are on, he is a football player. And it's fun to watch him chase down the big brown thing. And when he gets there in the right way. But that's Cole, that's Daniel, and Daniel will be playing inside for us. Chase Olm, Wyzetta, we've had close to 20 players, not quite. I think Chase makes 19 over the last decade and a half from Wyzetta. It's a program that's had a lot of history, and the players who come here have had a very storied past here as well. But Chase Olm, a guy sideline to sideline, a little bit different than a Daniel Cheetah. Daniel's going to be, even though he can run too, a little more down at you. Where Chase is going to be, I don't care where you run the ball, I'm going to run it down. And that's what we would put as the weak side inside backer, the wheel backer. Last position before we get to the specialist, defensive backs. So Union Grove High School, I think Coach Watkins did an amazing job. Georgia, and specifically the suburbs that are around Atlanta, have some unbelievable education and also some really good football. And when Coach goes down there to make sure that we are able to find the type of young man that we're looking for here, he found Quentin Griffin right away. Quentin can play corner, he could play safety, could play either of those two. We'll see how it all pans out. But the more that we can say that about our students, student athletes, the more we can say he can play multiple positions, usually trends to be a pretty good thing for the program, for the university. Peyton Himlin, so Peyton's from right down the road. I love the combination of right down the road and far away, but Peyton is the Edina kid. Now, who is he going to draw comparisons to if I tell you he's a free safety from Edina? Luke Lenna. Okay, he's not Luke Lenna yet, okay, just so we're all on the same page, right? But as I'm thinking when we're evaluating him, one of the things I love about our football program is, you know who wasn't Luke Lenna either 4 years ago? Luke Lenna. Right, so you have a guy, he's our school's very first Division I All-American, Luke Lenna is. And you know very well that if I walked him in this room right now, you'd probably be shaking your head and say, no, I asked for Luke Lenna, not that guy, right? He's grown into the player that we saw, the player that sets an all-time tackle record with 22 tackles and arguably one of our biggest wins ever over Davidson at home this year, right? And Peyton is very much like Luke was 4 years ago, 5 years ago. And if he's willing to work like our players work, like Luke worked, then maybe we have a shot of seeing him have 22 tackles on a really big day for the University of St. Thomas. But very happy to have Peyton. Came off an injury, did very well. I think you'll notice some of the length this year in the defensive backfield mirrors maybe what our length was in the wide receiving core 2 years ago, and hopefully you can see what that did along over time with growth. Gavin Nunnally, 6'1", 185, going to play safety for us. He's from Millard South, 6A football down in Omaha, really, really good football. I think finding these areas that are on the peripheral as we raise our division or our level of player, we just simply try and grow. A lot of it is expanding those circles concentrically from this point. And Omaha and getting into the southern part of Iowa and getting into the eastern part of Wisconsin and Chicago, that's on the fringe of that we've been able to expand. Millard South, really good high school, good safety. Griffin Phillips, one of the more polished players in the entire class. So it depends where he's going to play. If you ask our corners coach where he's going to play corner. If you ask our safeties coach where he's going to play, he's going to say safety. So I'm probably going to let Coach K decide where he's going to put him. But wherever he goes, he's going to be very productive, and he has a chance to be productive on the early side of his career, a chance. But really, really good football player out of De La Salle Collegiate, which Macomb is just outside of Detroit, okay, suburb of Detroit. Elijah Windham. Elijah's from West Texas. Now, I couldn't believe this wasn't the smallest town, but Coach, I mean, that's how far away is Midland from? The nearest town. From where?
About 4 hours from Dallas.
4 hours from Dallas, straight west. That's a lot of dry land that you got to drive over to get there. And I was grateful that our coaches were able to find him. And not just find him, but also he's a kid who, if he walks into this locker room today, he's going to have a lot of things to do physically that he needs to grow with. But mentally and emotionally, he knows exactly who we are as a program. Grateful. And last one of the class, we always save the kicker punter for last. I know, it seems like every other year we're taking a specialist out of Benilde St. Margaret High School. He will be our fourth kicker in the last 15 years out of Benilde St. Margaret High School. You want to get a picture of this? Go ahead, I'll stand up here. You going to send it to me? And he's a little different though. So he is a true combo. He can punt. He can also kick off. He's going to have a chance, bless you, he's going to have a chance to fight. I don't want to speak out of school, but fight for a position early on the kickoff side. We still have a lot of work to do. If you watched us play this year, I think we moved in the right direction. But he'll have a chance. But he's a longer kid, and I love it. The coaches identified the specialists, the kicker punters, and the quarterbacks in the state very accurately, pinpointed them and said, these are the guys and these are the guys, and went after them and prioritized them and found the right one that fits our program, and he's certainly one of those. So that's a general synopsis of the class. I hope I didn't take too long. Forgive me if I did. But at this point, I will certainly open it up to any and all questions that any of you guys have. Will they reach out to you to let you know if they have a question?
Yes. If anybody on the Zoom has a question, feel free to unmute yourself and ask.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
As we saw, you have recruits from all over the country. Why is recruiting Minnesota kids still very important to your program?
Well, first and foremost, there's no PR play here. If you've covered us, you know there's no PR when it comes to people, right? But we're talking about a state with 5.7 million people, with only 2 Division I football playing schools, and Minnesota A has the size and population to be able to support 12 guys in a class. To put it in perspective, in our first class, which now would be sophomore, so that's the class that just finished their sophomore year, we had 28 players. That was the COVID year. And of those 28, 15 were from Minnesota. That was the largest class of in-state Minnesota kids that any school, any Division I school, or any school, whether it's in-state or out-of-state, has ever taken. So it is maybe a touch higher than, I think, 42% of your class. But it's simply that there's some really good football that goes on here, and they understand who the University of St. Thomas is. We have assets, for lack of a better term, that you can see, like you're standing in one of those in this building. But we also have assets that you can't see, and I think the latter is more important than the former, in them knowing who we are as a university. But this program has always stood on the shoulders of Minnesota high school football players. And even though our reach and our footprint gets a little bit bigger, that's still how we decide to build it. Someday, if there's another guy sitting up here in another sweater vest, then he could decide what he wants to do. But for right now, that serves this program and this university very well. And we are grateful that there's that many that are into what we're doing. Absolutely grateful. Other questions?
We have a Zoom question from Patrick Borzi.
Patrick, how are you?
Hi, Glenn. How are you?
I'm well. Thanks for asking. What can I do for you?
Yeah, had a question about Eli Paulson. You've had some the sons of some famous people on this roster over the years, but I believe that this is the first son of an Olympic medalist. How do you think his background and upbringing has contributed to his toughness and his success in multiple sports?
I don't think that I can even do, I could try as the head coach that thinks he knows a lot about a lot of different things, but I don't think I can do it justice, Pat, because he is a very stoic guy. I mean, and not deadpan, like he's got a great personality, but beautifully stoic, like a lot of our players are when times are most competitive. But I think a lot of that comes from his upbringing. I had no idea when we first took a look at him that his family's pedigree is what it was. And I don't think it's a secret. Our kids come from all over. They look different. They're from different affiliations and backgrounds and 1-parent, 2-parent, 4-parent houses, whatever it might be. But one of the common threads is that they understand the difference between right and wrong, and they know how to work. And he certainly is in that boat for sure. And, we sat in there and there were 3 people, him and his parents. And I will tell you for a fact that the most mentally tough out of those 3 was the mom. So when she gets to jump ahead of a Olympic silver medalist, I think that's pretty cool. But I don't think we'll necessarily see it. I will say this. When you think about multi-sport in football, what would be some of the normal multi-sport combinations you would expect? You tell me. What would you expect?
Track, baseball.
baseball, football, track, football, basketball, football. If you look back over the years, and we've been together, some of these coaches, 20, 22 years. If you look back, I don't know, there are not the numbers in football wrestling, but of the numbers that we've gotten of kids who are football players and wrestlers, proportionately, they have had the most success of all of our two-sport athletes. And I think that speaks to the way that the two educations present. You have football that is decidedly lessen yourself, lessen yourself, lessen yourself, the good of the team, the good of the team, the good of the team. And you get that education, but that's balanced and measured with an entirely different education where the lights go down and a light comes and it's one-on-one out there and there's no one else to rely on. It's ultimate accountability. And I think the diametrically opposed educations really balance a kid out well. That's my opinion.
Glenn, how have you seen kind of the balance and the perspective of who you pursue recruiting wise change as not only as you've made this leap to Division I, but I mean, you've gotten good faster than a lot of people thought you would between 7-3, now 10-1. Does that kind of give you access to better athletes than maybe you could otherwise?
Yes, emphatically, without a doubt, yes. How? That's a bit of an enigma to nail it down, but I will say this. We would, on our football website or our questionnaires or however the unaffiliated recruiting part comes to, a kid will look at your school first. In a typical year, 5-6 years ago, every week we would get 50 to 60 on average inquiries to St. Thomas football in that inbox, 50 to 60 a week. Now we're probably closer to 600 a week without putting anything out there. So sorting through that is that's a lot of stuff. Sorting through that is certainly difficult. But I think what the yieldability is what it's allowed. These kids from that may not have that brand recognition of what St. Thomas is down the street. These coaches can now go into Baltimore or Washington or Texas or Chicago, and the kids understand because they've seen, thank you for covering us, but they've seen the coverage that this move allowed for, and the story of how we became a Division I school and the fact that we were fortunate enough to win a league faster than, that's not the goal to be fast, but faster than anyone in the history making a transition. I think that speaks to them, and they know that they've always known they can get a tremendous education at St. Thomas. And now they realize they can play a ridiculously high level of football and see the country. And I think there's an education in that evokes a very thoughtful young man. I think that's why that's happening.
And as a follow-up to that, is the culture and the fit just as important as anything else in terms of, for right now, at least for the next couple of years, I don't think you can guarantee them a postseason work even if you win a division title or a conference title. So how tough of a sell is that to a kid when they don't have a playoff chance?
How tough is it? It's not very difficult because of the way that our coaches are direct and honest and upfront from the jump. We hide nothing. You might like what our coaches have to say. You might not like what our coaches have to say. Either one is fine. What I can't have is not knowing what the coach is saying. So they're very direct with who we are. So it could be a major issue. This is now the third transition. We've been at 2 other schools that made the transition to Division I, and on our staff, I think we have a total of 7 coaches or 7 transitions in our coaching staff. And one of the things that in our opinion, you have to put at the top of the list is the culture is an overused word, but it's only overused if it's misused. It's not overused if it's used appropriately, okay? But that attitude has to be at the forefront. And we're just not gonna bend. I understand our guys are taller than they were a couple years ago. I understand they throw the football further. I understand they run faster. But who they are as students, who they are as wanting to become a better version of themselves and a member of the University of St. Thomas, I don't think that has changed at all. It's just allowed us access to be able to spread our reach a little bit further, if that makes sense. Yes, sir.
Glenn, how are we doing against North Dakota State, South Dakota State? And as sort of a follow-up after a season like this, do you see a difference from first year out there?
You're saying, do I see a difference on the recruiting trail?
Yes. Yeah.
Yes. We probably very humbly and very fortunately have to introduce who we are a lot less now, and that's awesome. That's understanding who St. Thomas is. But we'll be in the fights with some of the Power Fives, a lot of the Group of Fives, a lot of the schools that would be in the Valley. And once again, I think our hit ratio is pretty good, but that's subjective. It's pretty good because our coaches do a really good job of identifying who that young man is early. And the only, as my college coach, Jim Butterfield, who's in the College Football Hall of Fame, told me, there's only really 2 sins in recruiting. And a sin is not losing someone. It's taking someone that you know darn well shouldn't be in that locker room. That's a sin. And he said the other one is the misuse of time, because you don't know who you are and you don't know what you're going after. Time is our most precious commodity. And when our coaches are diligent and thoughtful enough to, on the front end, identify the type of kid who wants to be a part of something that no one's ever done, that insinuates that it's going to be more difficult than the average. And I think they did a great job with that. But it certainly has opened up doors that I'm not going to say that we didn't know could be opened, but doors that were not opened at other schools in the past. Not necessarily in this state, but outside our state borders. Anything else? Anything else? So I'll wrap it up by saying this. It's a fun day because it's a very acute accumulation and a lot of people are paying attention. There's not a whole lot of days in the off season that gets to be this fun because people are paying attention to it. Case in point, all of you that are here today. But we're going to tell if they're really that good in another 6 months or in another 3 years. And I think that in and of itself, there's a Longfellow quote that hangs in our locker room. There's 24 quotes that ring our locker room. And one of them is from Wadsworth Longfellow. And it says, "Let us then be up and doing with the heart for any fate, still achieving, still pursuing, learn to labor and to wait." And I think that embodies exactly what this class and what every class really is. Today's a wonderful day. We're happy to celebrate it. But as I say every year, I'm going to tell you the same thing that I say to our kids when I go to their wedding. They get married and you get that invite, and we get about 10 of them a year. When you're in college, they just keep cycling through. Like you never cycle out when you're a college football coach of the wedding circuit, ever. And I share with them the same thing. I say, "David, congratulations. Sally, congratulations. You look wonderful today. Now get ready to wake up tomorrow morning and go to work every single day, tirelessly, to make your decision the right decision." It's the same thing I tell every single recruit. Today is not a destination, but simply a milestone along their journey, and we're just grateful to be a part of it. I'm also grateful for you guys being here. Thank you to all the media that's covered, not just today, but throughout the entire season and decade. Grateful for you, and I'll be around if you have any questions. Thank you. Merry Christmas. God bless.